Welcome, everyone. My name is Jim Pikarski, and I lead meditation and give Dharma talks at the Blue Lotus Meditation Center here in Venice, Florida. Welcome. Today, I would like to talk about a topic that can be very helpful. It's three types of thinking and three types of awareness. And I think it can be very helpful for us to become aware of these things. So the three types of thinking, very quickly, are egoic thinking, practical thinking, and creative thinking. And the three types of awarenesses are awareness that's totally focused on concepts, awareness, non-conceptual awareness that is focused on an object, and non-conceptual awareness that's not focused on any object at all. So those are the three types of thinking and the three types of awareness. Now, one thing I think it's important for understand these things. We all have these experiences, and it's important to see what they are and have them pointed out. A lot of times we don't recognize these experiences in our life and don't understand the importance of them. Some of the experiences are important to be able to intervene on because they create suffering for ourselves. Other experiences are important for us to cultivate because when we cultivate them, we feel more joy and happiness in our lives. So, the first type of thought is what we call ego or samsaric thought. Samsaric thought in Buddhism is basically thought that is ignorant thought, or a thought that is wrong, thought that is mistaken. Um, It's also habitual. It comes from our conditioning, the past. It has as its center the self. So this kind of thinking centers around ourselves. Things like, how am I doing? Am I okay or am I not okay? Do people like me or not? It includes all kinds of worries, wanting and feeling lack and feeling separate from others. Um, all of the things that we think that create neurosis in our lives. One thing about it is unbidden. It's not like we're trying to think these things. These things happen almost automatically. We tend to think these thoughts all the time, whether we want to or not. Um, this is really the source of our suffering. All our neurosis comes from this level of thinking. Um, each thought can be painful in itself. If all of a sudden I have the thought, oh God, I can't do anything right, because we made a mistake, then immediately that thought is going to be painful. Other thoughts are painful are envious thoughts, or jealous thoughts, or arrogant thoughts, or anger thoughts, or fearful thoughts. All these are inherent in them as a certain amount of pain. They also lead to more painful actions and painful states too. Most of people's thinking is in this category. People can think all day long, and if they're not involved with practical thinking or creative thinking, they're basically lost in this ego-centered thinking. It's not productive, it's not practical, it accomplishes nothing. The only thing you're doing when you're thinking these thoughts is you're reinforcing all these beliefs, all these thoughts, and this tendency to think that way. So the other thing is that when we think this way, we respond emotionally and physically to these negative thoughts. So it's the source of our bad feelings and moods. So it's impossible to think something like, I can't do anything right without having an emotional consequence. Because our emotions are responses. Our emotions are responses to what's happening in the world. Like, all of a sudden, you know, we don't get a job and we feel bad about that. Well, that's actually happening. So that's an emotion about as a response to what's actually happening. However, a lot of our responses are not to what's happening. They're just what's going through our minds. And since events are, spaced out and our thinking is kind of constant, most all of our suffering is due to our thinking and response to our thinking. So one one thing about this type of thinking is that we get very enamored with it. It's very difficult for us to put it down because we believe it. So one of the problems is that we're so involved in this thinking, and we really wouldn't think this stuff unless we believed it. Um, so we rarely ask ourselves, is this actually true? What I'm thinking, am I actually a loser? Am I actually the greatest person on earth? If I'm having narcissistic thoughts, are we actually these things? We don't ask ourselves and really question these things. So the falseness of the thinking is never uncovered because we don't question it. It's almost like because we think it, it must be true. Well, I'm thinking it must be true. Um, the other thing about these thoughts is that they all revolve around what we call the ego. It's a self structure made of thoughts, feelings, and images about ourselves. As we grow, we create an ego. Um, this sense of self we can use practically and is not problematic for navigating in the world. However, we go too far and imagine this thought creation as our actual self. And this is just a thought creation, it's not an actual self. Um, but once we believe we are this thought creation, that it is our actual self, then we unconsciously try to protect it. We defend this thought construction, and when it is attacked, we can feel as deeply attacked as if our body was attacked. So if somebody calls you a fool, you can get as angry if somebody punched you. And what is being attacked when somebody calls you a fool? Only your idea of yourself. So, so once we identify with this thought construction in our mind, what happens is two things happen. One is our instincts come to the fore to protect it because we actually think it's us. So our aggressive instincts and our fight flight basically comes into the picture. And all of a sudden we're doing fight flight around our ideas of ourselves rather than fight flight protecting our bodies, which it was originally developed for. So, so once we develop this, what happens is that we create all this responses physically and emotionally, and these are very convincing. Well, if you feel really bad, then you go, yeah, I must be bad. So they just reinforce our negative beliefs. And so what we do is we create a whole continuous thing, and we have to keep thinking these thoughts too, because we actually think that we are these thoughts. We think we are what we think we are, and because we are kind of grasp onto that as our identity, it's almost like we have to keep these thoughts going. So this is one of the reasons that this type of thinking is so prevalent and so habitual. It's almost like if we didn't think for a while, we wouldn't know who we were. It's almost like we have to keep reinforcing these ideas. If we don't, then almost we feel like we don't exist. It's all an illusion, but it keeps us going. The second type of thought is called practical thought. So practical thought is, just focused on the accomplishment of a task. It's not inherently painful like ego thought because it really doesn't. The ego is being used more practically. Oh, I need to go to the store. Well, the I here is just, the way the ego should be used. It's just a practical way of talking about ourselves or thinking about ourselves. So if we make a grocery list, um, we really have to, think about what goes on the list and what we need and all that. So if we're doing laundry, we have to figure out what clothes are dirty and what need to be washed. So when we're focused on these things, what happens is one of the good things about it is that we're not focused on the egoic thought, the painful type of thought. So one thing that people do is they develop hobbies. Uh, all the attention we give to hobbies is a respite from thinking all these negative thoughts about ourselves or these worries about how we're doing in the world, if other people like us, and all those things that surround the ego. So you like to bake and you start reading everything about baking and what recipes you would like to try. And this takes up a lot of time. And because it takes up a lot of time, it gives us relief. And so there's a certain enjoyment in doing this in hobbies. And not only are we interested in it, but we, get away from our negative thinking. And because we get away from our negative thinking, there is a certain joy in that. Also, if you're into baking, you get a pie at the end too. So there's benefits from our hobbies. Um, so another thing that people escape into as practical thought is work. A lot of people become workaholics because when they're at work and focused on their job, they're not focused on themselves and they're not focused on their problems. So you're attending to the task and you're not distracted by personal concerns. So we just need to get the job done. We're thinking about details of the job. We're not thinking about whether we're good or bad. So, so one of the things is that we like to be practically occupied. We like to be practically occupied because we can escape from this negative egoic thought. You see teenagers do this. A lot of times teenagers have less control over their thoughts, and their thoughts can be really negative. And because they can be so negative, playing a video game or getting involved in a video game can take their mind off this for a while. So it's a relief. It's kind of takes them away from thinking about themselves. Um, the third type of thought is creative thought. Now, creative thought is this is thoughts really focused on bringing something new into the world, into your personal world or into the world at large. So we're really trying to change things for the better. So this type of thought can be focused on art, writing, new ways of doing things, spiritual study, understanding oneself psychologically, intellectual thought aimed at finding new understandings, inventions, all these type of thinking. Um, so this not only distracts us from the ego, but it also gives us a certain joy in creation. Can be very practical or not really that practical. And we can do art for art's sake. Can bring joy to others when shared. So when a person finds an interest that's practical or creative, it gives them a sense of peace and relief, which draws them back to the activity again and again. It's a short vacation from thinking painful ego thoughts. One of the things about engaging in practical and creative thought is that it is impossible to engage in this and just stay focused on the content of thought. Um, if we make a shopping list, in order for it to be practical, we have to, at some point, actually check and see what if we have butter. Otherwise, the list has to match reality in some way. So we can't really do practical thinking and creative thinking without um, checking with reality, without moving to awareness that's non-conceptual. If we're composing music at some point, we need to hear how it actually sounds by playing the notes on a piano or other instrument. If we're going to understand anything spiritually, we need to look directly at our experience and to see how this operates or to see if it's even true. And by doing that, what we do is we make the spiritual understanding our own. But until then, it's just a belief system and doesn't do us much good. The difference with ego thoughts is that we don't have to check ego thoughts out. As a matter of fact, ego thoughts can repeat endlessly with us never having to check them out. So reality may never confront them unless someone tells us that the negativity that goes on in our mind is unusual or is untrue. A lot of times, until we share that, we get no feedback whatsoever. We can think these thoughts for years and years and years and basically torture ourselves and not even understand what we're doing. So, one of the basic practices is to become aware of the type of thinking that we're doing. Are we doing ego thoughts? If we're doing ego thoughts, then it's really important for us to wake up to that fact. Because if we continue with it, we're just going to create more suffering for ourselves. Um, are we Is our thinking practical? Is it based in reality? Is it creative? It's good to know these things. It's good to be able to see these things, particularly so that you can reduce the amount of time that you're spent in negative egoic thinking. So now let's go down to three types of awareness. So these three types of awareness interact with thought, and it's important to understand these too. The first type of awareness is an awareness that's fully focused on the content of thought. And this awareness is with us anytime we're thinking, anytime we're thinking. So if we're doing egoic thought, practical thought, or creative thought, anytime we're thinking about these things, our awareness is focused on the content of our thoughts. So it supports all three levels of thought. Um, so, it's kind of the same thing, except here we're looking at it from the point of view of awareness. Where is our awareness focused? It's focused on the content of thought. So when we're dealing with egoic or samsaric thought, what happens is that we're basically staying focused on the stories, the content of the stories we're telling about ourselves. Um, we're not even aware that we're creating unhappiness for ourselves because we're not even pulling away from it enough to be able to see that. So with this type of awareness that's totally involved in the content of thought, there's a great lack of perspective. We only see things from the view of our conditioned habitual thoughts, or our practical thoughts, or our creative thoughts. It's almost like we're just lost in thought itself. So our attention, our awareness gets enamored with the stories going through our mind. Um, so there's another type of awareness. The second type of awareness is no thought. And no thought, this type of no thought is non-conceptual awareness with an object. That means that you're not thinking, but you're focused on something. And so our mind is quiet, and yet we are focused on something in the environment or something else, and we're seeing it. We're not lost in thought. Um, so when we're involved in a task, we're focused on the task itself. This is typically intermingled with practical or creative thought. As a matter of fact, you can't have practical or creative thought without moving toward awareness with no object, with an object. So if I'm, again, if I'm doing a task like, a carpentry task, I need to look at what I'm doing. If I don't look at what I'm doing, I'll hit my thumb with a hammer or cut my finger off with a saw. So there is this interaction back and forth between my thinking, my plans, what I'm planning to do, and the actual carrying of this out. So so we move back and forth. We move back and forth from the content of thought to actual reality. When we're focused on reality, this is non-conceptual awareness with an object. Okay, I'm aware of hammering. That's the object. As I'm aware of hammering, then I make sure that I don't hit my thumb. This is also occurs in, as we've said, in creative thought. So in creative thought, you really, if you're an artist, every once in a while, say you're a visual artist, every once in a while you move away from your painting and you see how it's coming and you see what the feel is and you kind of look at it very closely and see what you're creating and see if it is what you want to create. In spiritual inquiry, we move from the teaching to our direct experience to see if what we're being told is true. So in spiritual inquiry, what we do is we, say, hey, how is this true in my life? Where can I see this? I don't really know if it's true until I can see it in some way. This also happens in meditation. So in meditation, when we realize that we're thinking, we become aware that we're thinking. As soon as we become aware of what we're thinking, instead of being lost in the content of thought, now thought becomes an object and we're aware that we're thinking. And because we're aware that we're thinking, we're kind of outside of thinking. So it's a non-conceptual awareness where the object is that we're aware of, or we're aware of thinking itself. Once we're aware of thinking and we're thinking, we can move to another object, just an object that's non-conceptual, like our breath or our body sensations. So first we wake up to the fact we're thinking, and then we move our attention gently to something that is non-conceptual, like our breath or our body sensations. So so one thing is that when we're doing this, what happens is that the more time we stay focused on our breath or our body sensations, and we're not indulging in our thought processes, we're not disturbing our psyche, we're not creating negative emotions, and we're not creating stress for ourselves. And this is one of the main reasons that meditation is so relaxing to us. It's relaxing because we have cut off basically the source of our suffering, which is being lost in egoic thought. So, we just notice our breath. And as we're noticing our breath, we're paying attention to that, and we're not paying attention to the content of thought. So, this creates a lot of peace. Our attention is free of the thought stream. Uh, we cannot torture ourselves with thoughts about ourselves because we're not even thinking. Ideas and feelings about self do not arise. We're not disturbing ourselves emotionally. So it gives us a break from the thought stream. The one thing about meditation that's different than hobbies, because hobbies take us away from our thinking or our egoic thinking too. But the difference is with hobbies, we're not directly into awareness itself, awareness with an object. What happens is we're just changing our mode of thinking. So, in a sense, by being involved with a hobby, we're still involved with thought. So, we're not learning to disengage from thought, we're just learning to change thought, change it from egoic thought to practical thought or creative thought. Meditative attention on our breath is not dependent on our interests like hobbies, and creative activity is also, dependent upon our interest. Some people like to, do visual art. Some people like to do music. Some people like to do other things. There's nothing inherently interesting about our breathing. We free ourselves of having to have an interest at hand in order to have some peace. So we can do this anytime. So instead of, I have to get back to my studio so I can do art, it's like I can right now move my attention away from my thinking and put it on my breath. And because I can do that at any time of the day, I have developed a technique to do two things. One is to give myself immediate peace, and the other is to train my mind to be able to wake up to the fact that I'm thinking and to move my attention off of it. As I develop this skill, what happens is I become more and more skillful in doing it. So we're training ourselves to basically do two things with meditation: be aware and wake up to the fact that we're thinking, and then consciously move away from our thinking to our breath. Um, it's like we're building a muscle, a skill or positive habit of being able to move from our thinking to our breath. Mindfulness practice. Now, mindfulness practice typically encourages us to practice, non-conceptual awareness with an object. We're paying attention to each dish as we wash the dishes. We pay attention to each step as we walk. Uh, this brings the practice of non-conceptual awareness with an object from the meditation cushion to our daily life. So again, we are learning to consciously take our attention away from the painful ego thoughts or any kind of thoughts and tend to direct experience itself. So non-conceptual awareness with an object is also practiced when we do, mantra, chant, or repeat prayers. We're creating a different set of things to be able to focus on, something that we experience as having some kind of spiritual energy. These practices can be very powerful. I've heard many stories of people having great spiritual breakthroughs after periods of repetition of a mantra. This is pretty common in the literature. In Tibet, they do the Om Mani Padme Hum mantra. The Dalai Lama does that all the time. Um, so a lot of these practices, spiritual practices, really are ways of practicing non-conceptual awareness with an object. Now, there's non-conceptual awareness without an object. In non-conceptual awareness without an object, we are aware, but we are not thinking anything, and we're not focused on one set of sensations, like our breath or a task at hand. Our non-conceptual awareness is open. It's not focused. There's no sense of me looking at that. I'm just, it's like pure presence. It's pure being. We're just open to all experience at that moment. We're not spaced out because we're very aware, and we're not focused in thought or towards one set of sensations. It's like the whole field of awareness is we're being aware of everything at the same time equally. This typically happens to non-practitioners or normal people only during dramatic moments or only for quick moments throughout the day. So if you go to some place like Yosemite or the Grand Canyon, the first time you see it, you may be in awe. And that awe is you're taking the whole thing in at once. And in other words, you're just experiencing the openness in the environment and the kind of beauty of it. And you're not focused on any thought, and you're not focused on any particular thing in the environment. It's not like you're looking at that little guy walking down there. You just notice the whole thing. So we are aware of the whole field of awareness. And another experience that we have of that is falling in love. Sometimes people, when they fall in love, they feel this general good feeling where awareness is just open. And there's no, we may have times of thinking about the other person, but a lot of times we're just going around feeling happy. Another place this is experienced is when people surrender into peace before death. Sometimes you'll see this with dying people. They just surrender and open themselves up to a deeper peace. Um, Another place you'll find this in normal experiences is orgasm. So when you have an orgasm, sex is kind of interesting because when you're moving toward orgasm, you're very focused because you're focused on sensation at that moment. You're practicing non-conceptual awareness with an object. As soon as you come to orgasm, what happens is now you are experiencing non-conceptual awareness with no object. You're just feeling generally good, and it's not there's not much focus at that point. Some people experience this with at the birth of a child. Other people experience this when they take psychotropic medication like LSD. Another place this is experienced is deep dreamless sleep. The thing about deep dreamless sleep is that your mind is quiet at that time, and because the mind's quiet, that's all you remember is the peace. You can't remember anything because nothing's really happening. So there's nothing to remember except the peace. Some people try to make this happen and change sexuality from focus on an object uh, to tantric sex, where you try to be open to all your senses and not focused on the end result. Um, but there are many practices that people tend to do. Sometimes getting a massage does this. Sometimes getting into a hot tub and just experiencing the delight of the moment. So one thing is it's really about being in the present moment. It's really non-conceptual, and you're really not focused on anything in particular. Everybody experiences this. As a matter of fact, people have this experience throughout the day, and they don't notice it because as soon as it's just not memorable, nothing's happening. So it's like unless it's really filled with intense joy or intense sensual pleasure, a lot of times we don't notice it. Spiritually, this occurs during deep spiritual experiences. Um, so if you're feeling oneness and love for everyone, you are moving beyond yourself. You're also, it's very open. And because it's very open, it just goes in all directions at once. So unbidden spiritual experiences can be like that. It's like you're opening, or it's like Christ when the dove came down to him in the River Jordan, or the Transfiguration, or the Ascension. These things are, these experiences are talked about many times in the spiritual literature of all countries. Um, in in meditation, you experience this by experiencing what they call calm abiding. So if you're focused on your breath for a while, a lot of times what happens is your focus, you kind of defocus after a while. Your mind remains non-conceptual. You're not thinking, but you're just aware, and you're sitting there aware, and you're not so much focused on your breath or your sensations anymore, although they're there. You're just not focused on them, and you can feel deep peace in this, and you're very open at that point, and it's a very good feeling. Some people go into Samadhi, which are deeper states, or the jhanas, which are deeper states, and they experience this doing that during meditation. So because the mind is stopped during these experiences feel very timeless, because time is something that we measure with the mind. When we move into non-conceptual awareness, these experiences can be experienced as being very timeless. So one of the ways of practicing this is just being aware of awareness. So right now, you are listening to this, but you're experiencing other sensations too, besides my voice or my image if you're watching YouTube. And just notice all the sensations that you're experiencing at one time. So what we're doing is, instead of focusing, we're expanding our awareness to take in everything. And sometimes we're not used to doing this consciously, so you may need a little practice doing this. So, and then when we're doing that, what we realize is that this is the whole field of awareness. That this whole field of awareness is my experience. It's always my experience. A lot of times I don't notice it. I'm just not aware of it. I haven't given it proper attention. So, in certain spiritual traditions like Dzogchen and Mahamudra and some other spiritual traditions, they encourage you to practice this many times during the day, just being in touch with this open awareness. So, excuse me. So, one of the major things is for us to become aware of this state of egoic thinking, because the state of egoic thinking is where suffering arises. And what we want to do is we want to become aware of it so we can move out of it. Because if we're not aware of it, we're just so lost in the content of these thoughts that we just don't wake up. So we need to wake up and be aware of it. Meditation is a wonderful way to do this, because you're practicing and you're training yourself to be able to do this. So you're training yourself to initially move from this egoic awareness, egoic thinking, to awareness with an object like your breath or sensations. But ultimately, what we do is we start practicing it and we start experiencing non-conceptual awareness without an object. And it's very peaceful and and it's very open. So it has the capacity to love greatly too, because it's so open. It doesn't have preconceived notions or judgments or any. Those are all thoughts, and they're not happening during that state. So it can behoove you to understand these 6 states. Everybody experiences them. They're part of everybody's experience, and you can start looking for them. And if you start looking for them and you start discriminating them, in other words, discriminating each from each other, then what happens is that you'll be able to have much, much more capacity to be able to modify your experience when you need to, suffer less, and be able to experience these expanded states of consciousness. So I will continue to talk about these in a little more detail. Maybe next time I'll talk about the egoic thoughts and how they operate in a little more detail. But thank you for being with us. One thing I would like to say to everyone is that Blue Lotus Meditation Center in Venice, we had a roof collapse, and we're looking for donations so that we can fix our building and get it back. There was a water damage because of a storm. So if you'd like to give to us, go to our website, Blue Lotus Meditation Center in Venice, Florida, and you can make a donation if you'd like to. Thank you very much.